And now we are at the end of season 2. But of course, as we end each season, we and start each season, we only call upon some of the most amazing of minds to treat each and every one of you who have joined us for our journey into the worlds of magic and occultism. And I am by far very, very honored to have a personal friend of mine close season 2 for us. You see, if we're going to go back to the old saying of Aleister Crowley that magic is the art and science of causing change in one's environment in conformity to one's will, I got to be honest when I say that this individual has changed the environment of magic and occultism around the world. A scholar of the Western arts and the Eastern arts of Feng Shui, he has contributed to the study of magic in a way that if he didn't do it, life would be so much more difficult for us. From his countless hours scouring the British Museum for manuscripts to understand and consolidate the knowledge into something workable, to his cutting-edge research in Feng Shui, the things that he's done are second to none. And one of the most things that I'm thankful for about this guest is if it's not for him, a lot of us would still be in kind of a silver age of our occultism. I first heard about him when I heard about the legendary tome, The Goetia of Dr. Rudd. And before you guys ask, no, this is not Dr. Rudd himself. Dr. Rudd is dead. But what our guest tonight has done, he has taken obscure topics and placed them in a way that's not only digestible, but it's workable. So in other words, he takes these topics and he makes them practical. So without further ado, I am honored to have my dear friend join us on Magic.tv for Season 2's Enders of Magic.tv, my dearest friend, Dr. Stephen Skinner. Hello, Stephen.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you again, old friend.
I don't know how many years since we first met, but it's quite a long time.
I'm sure biggest regret of your life, I'm willing to bet.
I don't think so.
Now, actually, I had the honor of meeting Dr. Stephen Skinner in person in Singapore. When I read my first book, Defensive Occultism, I hand delivered a copy of it to him to request him to review, and he wrote a beautiful review for it. I never thought that Dr. Skinner would end up such an influential person in my life, as when he visited Manila, I also saw him, and we've remained in touch with each other throughout the years. But the one thing that I like about Dr. Skinner is he doesn't have what we call occult high horse syndrome. The nicest thing about him was when I messaged him was he actually replied. You'd be surprised how many authors don't bother replying just because I'm a nobody. So with that, Dr. Stephen, I'd like to ask you, tell us about you. What got you started? What got you on the path of the occult? What was your original inspiration?
Well, I think as a child, I was always interested in what might be happening in the background underneath the obvious. And even something like Feng Shui, I almost instinctively made a small water dragon when I was just a kid without even knowing what a water dragon was.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to magic, I suppose I was about 10 or 12 when I first got interested in it. I went around to the local library and started to read my way through all the books listed as 133.4, which was the old Dewey classification for magic. Most of it was witchcraft, but then I read my way through Golden Dawn, and then I started to meet people. And I have to say that the tarot was my first introduction to people in the occult world. So one of the spin-offs from the Theosophical Society ran regular tarot meetings. And these were quite high level. And I was only a school kid at the time. I didn't expect to be invited, but I was invited. And after attending a few, I was invited to actually do one or two of the talks. And then the Theosophical Society invited me to do talks on it as well, and the rest is history. But I met people who were influential for the rest of my life, like Dr. Nikolai Terashenko, who's passed away now, but he introduced me to a lot of the early stuff. And well, the rest is history. I have always been interested. I've always been interested in magic. Feng Shui came along a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they are not the same, and they don't really connect. I've had some people say, "Whoa, should I study magic or should I study Feng Shui?" And I say, "Well, it depends on what you want to do." And they don't know what they want to do. I think they just want power or the ability to change things. And of course, both magic and Feng Shui give you the ability to change things. Feng Shui
Indeed.
being somewhat simpler.
I wanted to ask. You said you started with tarot. May I dare ask what deck did you start with as a fellow tarot enthusiast?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was starting with the tarot group was the first group that I joined.
Mm-hmm.
You don't join groups for evocation, not in those days, in that place first up. And of course, it was the Waite Pamela Coleman pack,
Mm-hmm.
which is full of a lot of symbolism, as you know. Um, yeah, I think that, and also the Marseille pack. But
Very popular decks.
my God, now so many packs that call themselves tarot, which don't even necessarily have 78 cards and feature pussycats or parrots or whatever else. I mean, full marks for creativity, but it's pulled a long way away from the tarot. So since then, I've done things like go to look at the Sforza family in Italy, and because they were very instrumental in creating tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And I also looked into Egyptian things when I very rapidly realized that tarot has not got an Egyptian origin. This is a fiction invented by, I don't know, you're frowning. Does that mean you disagree with me?
No, no, no. I actually agree with you on this because some people say that tarot originated in Egypt, and I'm like, please continue though. I'd love to hear more about this.
Well, it just plain didn't. Comte de Mellet first started talking about it, and it was originally a set of symbolic cards,
Mm-hmm.
which the Sforza family probably first used. It was a game, and then it became more serious. And but we're talking about 1400 or thereabouts, not 2600 BC.
That's not like before Christ or anything like that. No, the thing I wanted to ask is like after your initial study, did you join any magical orders or organizations like the Golden Dawn, the Lima, the OTO, or was it all a personal mishmash of your own study and research?
No, well, in Sydney, I lived in Sydney. I was lucky to run into a guy who was a practicing magician,
Mm-hmm.
and he showed me a lot of things. He was also building an around the world trimaran, which
Mm-hmm.
I think he was more interested in than magic. But so, and I used to go with him to the tarot meetings, and that's where. And then after that, I got hold of various grimoires, and I realized that the essence of magic is communication with spiritual entities like spirits, demons, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fact, that was quite fun because I first wanted to buy a copy of the Goetia.
Mm-hmm.
I was still a schoolboy, and I went to the local theosophical bookshop. I'm sure a lot of people can identify with this. And I knew the senior person there, and she said, I'll order it for you. Come in next week, and we'll have it." I went in next week, and I got somebody else, not the same. And I said, "Oh, I've come to pick up my copy of the Goetia." She
Mm-hmm.
looked horrified and rushed into the back office. "There's a schoolboy out there who wants to be. I can't sell him the Goetia, can I?" And
You're a
the
prodigy.
senior
If,
the
if
senior person.
what issue what edition of the Goetia was it? The Mathers Go
Uh,
Crowley
it
or
was
what?
yes, it was the Mathers Crowley because we're talking more than half a century ago
Mm-hmm.
when there wasn't a massive number of packs. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
there were only there was the Crowley pack, there was the Coleman and what's the name pack. So yeah, I've lost my thread.
We're talking
Anyway, so she
evocation.
rushed into the back office, and out came the senior bookshop owner, librarian, or whatever. Ah, it's Stephen. He's all right. You can give it to him. So I got my first copy of the Goetia, went home and studied it pretty thoroughly.
And how many years did it take for you to go from studying it to actually using it, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, I actually started using it in my first year at university. I got to university when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably bought it when I was 13 and used it when I was 16. And I have been fairly lucky with things like that because a friend had a spare cottage which they weren't using, and so I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, let's do a goetic evocation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of time getting all the stuff together, and we did, and we actually got a manifestation.
Wow.
We got uh, very strangely, we got a figure that was so tall that was only his legs showing, which
Wow.
was a bit weird, but it worked. And then my second and third evocation, I had one. Um, I think this is something I've mentioned before to other people. Um, I was working on another goetic demon, and what showed up was a very angry head about the size of an orange,
Mm-hmm.
gnashing its teeth at me and snarling, hanging in the air in front of me. Fortunately, I was in a circle, and which would have been quite scary had I not already figured that this is the sort of thing I was looking for rather than not expecting. And from then on, I had no doubt at all that these creatures are independent. Um, they've been around for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and for the last couple of centuries, they haven't been disturbed very much because not many people were using classical magic. But ever since I don't know, the last 20 years, more and more people, starting with people like Steve Savedow, myself, and David Rankin, have been disturbing their slumbers, and they've become much more active. It in fact makes it easier for other people new to the field.
So you're of the belief of the spirit model and not the mental model, where some people would say that, for those of you who don't know, the mental model is that all of these demons are in our head, while the spirit is like, no, they're completely independent.
Yeah, my attitude to spirits and taming them is like one of my friends' attitude to wild horses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're tractable if you talk to them in the right way and you offer them the right sort of sugar
Mm-hmm.
and use the right words of power. But otherwise, they can be a bit ropey. Um, if it was in my head, I don't think some of the things I've seen would have happened because they're things that are not part of my imagination or my cultural background, but by God, they came. So you can do some forms of mental magic just inside your head,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't get the very rapid and external events happening, uh, very definite, concrete results inside of a week, 10 days at most, from sitting there and meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the things that Crowley did, which has hampered magic for the last 100 years. He tried to mix mysticism and magic together. And mysticism, I mean, he did yoga and he did that quite well. And I do subscribe to yoga being a useful practice and I quite enjoy it. But it's not magic.
Mm-hmm.
Magic is much more proactive. It's not divination. Divination, magic, and meditation and mysticism are all different practices,
Mm-hmm.
and people confuse them in their head. And Crowley was the guy who made the statement in his edition of the Goetia that spirits are just portions of the human brain, which is a ridiculous statement taken at any level. Even portions of the human mind is still, as you said, the mental um, interpretation of magic. But after my first few experiences, I definitely do not subscribe to the mental interpretation of magic.
That makes two
Um,
of us. I personally do believe they have a sentience, but like also what Lon Duquette would say, God bless him, it's all in your head, but you'd be surprised how big your head is. So I do kind of think that like that's how we communicate, but I don't think that they're parts of us completely. Now I do have
Yeah.
a question, since you seem to be very intricate about how you've been like the one of the gold standards of how to practice the Goetia or evocation at the intricate level. Without giving into too much detail, because I do respect the privacy of it, how long would the prep work be for you if you chose to summon a goetic demon today? Let's say, all right, Rob, today we're going to summon this person. We, of course, we can't do it today, but how much prep time in advance would you put into it?
Okay, so the big prep time is producing the instruments,
Mm-hmm.
and their physical work and so forth. But once you've done those, and you've got a set that is consecrated and works, then the prep time is anywhere between 7 days and 3 days.
Mm.
And for prep, I would always fast. And I don't mean an Islamic fast of just during daylight hours. I mean no food, 24 hours times 3 days, plenty
Whoa.
of water and plenty of liquids. And it really does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the spirits notice it as well. Like one of them even commented that, um, no, I won't go there, that's too private.
Yeah, I
But
understand.
the spirits do notice, and they respond better if you have fasted. So fasting is one thing. And then secondly, on the day itself, it's important that you pick the day related to the same planet, if it's a planetary operation,
Mm-hmm.
and pick the hour that's also related to the planetary same planet. So it'll be the first or the eighth hour, or if it's night, it'll be the third hour of the night or the 10th hour. And that makes a big difference, because if you call a mercurial spirit in a Saturnian hour, um, you diminish your chances of getting a result considerably. And I've always said that's a little bit like if you want to speak to your doctor and you call him up at 3 a.m. in the morning, your chances of getting the result you want are pretty minimal.
That's the
Uh,
least you're gonna have to worry about.
exactly.
I find it hilarious. What about abstinence? Is that something that you prescribe to in preparing for an evocation? Like, the purity, no anything like that?
You're talking about sexual abstinence.
Yes, pure sexual abstinence.
Yeah, I would abstain for 3 days
Three
before.
days.
Um, that's a bit more of a personal thing, but abstaining from food is more important than abstaining from sex.
And
Um,
before I forget, do you do it independently, like you are both the evoker and the scryer, or do you have somebody scry with you?
okay. If I'm lucky enough to have a good scryer, then I will, of course, take a scryer in. But in many cases, I don't really want anybody else in the circle. And so, um, obviously, it's more work to get a physical appearance, but I am quite happy these days with just getting physical indication of the spirit's presence. I don't need the spirit to form up a monstrous or a human shape. I have done that, but that is hard work. Um, so, for example, I might be in a house where there's absolutely nobody else out in the country, and having called the spirit, one or two of the doors will open and slam again vigorously. And then I know the spirit has arrived. Or there are other physical phenomena like the air will suddenly change, like it's got champagne bubbles in it.
Mhm.
You can vaguely see it happening. And or the temperature will drop. And I am happy now with an indication of its presence, rather than demanding complete physical manifestation each time. So consequently, um, it's still useful to have a scryer, because then you can get exact words and images and sigils and things. But if you just want to produce a result next Thursday, then you don't need the scryer. You command the spirit, you bind the spirit to do a particular thing. That's one of the problems that most people have when they don't get results. They don't bind the spirit properly. And then the result, whatever it is, will happen next Thursday, if
Mhm.
that's what you've specified.
Fascinating. And with regard to the abstinence and the fasting, if you do work with a scryer, do you demand the same level of adherence, or is it just you
Yes.
as the evoker?
No, no. If I work with the scryer, then the scryer will also fast. You need to you need to improve your chances of getting a good result, and so I do impose that as well on the scryer.
Would
How
you bring
about
me
you? You
Well, when I did it, of course, unfortunately, I am not as eloquent in the practice as Dr. Stephen. So I had to fast from other things, but fasting for 3 days was something I don't think I could have done without losing my mind. But I did have a very clear set of standards of what I would not do, which I cannot really divulge. That I also told my scryer when we summoned the patron of the show, Belial, that for the next 7 days, this is what's not happening. No alcohol, and it's other things as well. No psychedelics or anything. I wanted us to be as pure as possible
yes,
because this was something that, like I was saying to myself, that if I'm going to do this, I want to do it as right as possible, and I'm
yes,
very happy with the results. Which brings me to my next thing. Like people, when I first heard of Dr. Stephen Skinner, and I've told you about this when we met over coffee in Singapore. I actually heard about the magician's tables, but one of my friends told me, was like, no, 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 don't even bother with that yet. You gotta get the Goetia of Dr. Rudd. So your name is kind of synonymous with Dr. Rudd. That some people say, "Oh, Stephen Skinner, isn't he Dr. Rudd?" It's like he's not that old. You know what I mean? Hey, come on. So, how did you stumble upon the legendary Goetia of Dr. Rudd?
okay. So when I started out, it was in Australia. I came to London, 1972, and I booked a British Museum ticket before I arrived
Mhm,
because it was much harder in those days. You needed credit, you needed references, academic references, etc. And the catalogues in the British Museum, it was then the British Museum, not the British Library, were handwritten cards in masses and masses of drawers. And so I worked my way through looking for grimoires. So, of course, I looked up Goetia first, and there was a cross reference to the manuscript of Dr. Rudd's Goetia. And then I did more research and figured out that he was an early user of the Goetia and quite an accomplished magician. Um,
mhm.
and Well, since then, research, I found 160 Key of Solomon manuscripts and dozens of other grimoires. And what the trouble is that a lot of the libraries were dubious about cataloging them as books of practical magic. And so they'd think of some other innocuous description. And so digging them all out took a long time.
Mhm.
And now, of course, a lot of them have been digitalized. And so friends of mine have got huge collections of grimoires. And then I spent a lot of time reading through all these, looking for the little hints which are not necessarily in the printed book, which make a difference between success and failure. So, yeah, I don't know whether that answers the question, but
Oh, it does. It does. Because it actually is going to lead me to my next question. Since you have been such, how do I say, motivation for people to further their studies into occultism because of your editing and compiling of books into certain workable manuals. The next question I want to ask you is: has there ever been a book which would be kind of like, let's say, the monkey's paw, or like, oh my god, I regret touching that. That was such a cursed tome. If there was, you don't even need to mention the name. But if there was such a book, I'd love to hear a story about that, like the
oh,
dreaded book.
should I recommend a few of these
Oh,
dreaded
that would be
books?
great. I'd love that. I'd love that. Please.
It would not be fair to your viewers, though.
Well,
Um,
for the best.
no, no, the books themselves aren't that dangerous.
Mhm,
It's what you do with them, and the books, uh, theory books about magic, quite often don't tell you what you need to do.
mhm,
The reason why grimoires are important is these are the practical records, the working documents of practicing magicians. Like John Dee wrote thousands of pages, which I spent far too much of my life translating, copying, and putting into print. But in amongst all of this, there were many, many failures and one or two or three successes. And he was working with angels, but frequently some other entity would turn up and spin him alone. So it is good to read where people failed as well as where people succeeded. And so at present, I'm working on one really quite powerful grimoire, and I'm still hesitating about publishing it because, well, I just don't think it's an activity for everybody.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, even tarot reading is not an activity for everybody. Like cricket isn't an activity for everybody.
It's very
Um,
niche.
but with the one I'm working on at the moment, it's not the book that would get you into trouble, but trying to cut corners on this particular grimoire will get you into trouble. And no, I'm not going to give you the title.
I figure you wouldn't, because this is going to lead me now to the next question I wanted to add to it. Of course, would be then. Of course, there is probably to date after the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, my favorite book of yours, Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic. Now he doesn't go. You don't go around and say this is the PGM, because I realize that the PGM is not in here. This is kind of like the thing that's going to help you source through the PGM and make sense out of it. What led you to the study and practice of the PGM? Because I do know that you used it to catch a thief. You told us about that in an interview a long time ago. So it proves the effectivity of the PGM. What led you to want to delve into the practice of the Greek magical papyri?
Well, first of all, I was going to do my PhD, my doctorate on grimoires, and I went to speak to my supervisor, and she said, "Well, where did it all start?" And I said, "Well, it started with the PGM." And she went, "Well, then you should do something about the PGM." And in the end, I finished up doing not just the PGM, but also a lot of the more modern grimoires. So my research went from 100 BC to about 1800 AD. And that was very foolish because the whole thesis turned out to be 50% or more than that longer than it was meant to be, or it was fortunately allowed in the end. But I bit off far more than I should have. But in the process of looking at the PGM, I saw that just reading Betts's English translation of the PGM is very confusing because you dive in and it's a collection of this. There's a bit of divination, there's a little bit of scrying, there's a little bit of demon calling, there's a bit of God calling. And how does it all fit together? So I started rearranging it. And then, as a result of needing to do it as my thesis, I was obliged to learn ancient Greek, well, actually, Koine Greek,
Wow.
which I can tell you it's not as hard as Sanskrit, but it's still one of the hardest languages. I found Chinese easier than
Wow.
Koine
Okay.
because the Greek has got many, many different endings and cases and all that stuff, whereas Chinese, you don't have trouble with all that. It's a bit
Mm-hmm.
more abstract, but you don't have that trouble. So, so I learned the Greek as fast as I could. And then I realized that the translations were all done by academics who didn't believe that magic was anything but a bit of a waste of time. So you had 60 different Greek words translated as spell. And I thought that's crazy. There are 60 different procedures. So I looked at it and I said, okay, so I've got to read the Greek. So I bought the Price and Dance, the Greek text, and I went through every single ritual that Betts puts into English and retranslated the background, etc., etc. And I haven't published that, but so that gave me an overview, and then I could group things that were the same together. A lot of work, a lot of time sitting and working at it. But it also meant that I could then read the Greek spells. And so I started using the Greek spells in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
and they worked very fast. So I thought, this is fascinating, because what was working for the ancient Greeks and indeed the ancient Egyptians still works now. So the entities behind those spells still exist. In one or two places, I got a completely null result, so I don't know why that is. But in other places, I got a lot of positive results, one
Does
or two
that
negative
mean,
ones.
Dr. Skinner, that saying the spells in English over Greek makes a big difference?
Saying them in Greek is better,
And
but
is
you can
better.
still say them in English. I suspect that spirits probably don't dwell upon what's coming out of your mouth, but the thought behind it. Or maybe it's just that some of the spells, they're only small batches of words which actually do the business.
Mm-hmm. Like the
Like,
voices magicae, right? The magical
mhm.
voices or the barbarous
Yes,
words. Am I
yeah.
correct?
And these are things that academics have said, these are nonsense or whatever. But in most cases, they're proper nouns. So they're the names of spirits or spirits' assistants. And that's what it calls. They're not nonsense. And so I've gone through and picked out some of these pieces of supposed nonsense and figured out. And so some of the spells you can just use a minimum number of the Greek words. And then in English, you can say what it is you want to achieve, and that does the business. But
Would a
so,
spell like the headless rite be an example of that? Where if we've
yeah,
done it in wording, or I'd love to hear your take on
the
that.
the Acephalus spell, the headless rite, which Crowley used, is actually an exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
It's to drive spirits away. So don't get me started on Crowley. So he used that when he was in Egypt, and what he realized or didn't realize is that there were Greco-Egyptian words, and he was using them in Egypt, and that is more powerful than using them in London or New York. Um, and so he did call up entities, and his 3-day transmissions in April 1904 were actually dictated by not just one spirit, but there's two or three spirits in there talking. And if you look at the text, you can clearly see where one ceases and a completely different tone takes up. It's another spirit. And the dictation was to his wife, and she voiced it to him. And he said, "Oh, I was alone in the room, and I could hear the voice behind my left shoulder or something." It wasn't. He could hear her acting as a scryer
Mm-hmm.
and voicing out loud while he scribbled frantically. He was just transcribing it, so that later she came back and actually made corrections on some of his writing. If she wasn't in the room, how could she have made corrections? Well, she couldn't have. She was in the room, and she was the bridge, acting as a scryer. And it's a scryer or a magician are actually two different types of people, which is why I don't really scry for myself, and why a scryer is quite often necessary for if you're beginning an operation. But as I said, indications that the spirit has arrived are more than adequate for me now.
Amazing. Amazing. So yeah, well, thank you for that first segment. I mean, I think getting to know more of your war stories would take a lot more than just one segment, but I'm going to make the most as we can out of the day, because the next thing we're going to talk about is the current event segment of occultism. As a scholar, as a contributor to the study, how do you see the state of occultism nowadays as a practitioner and as a person who's enthusiastic about these practices? Do you see it's getting better? Is it getting bastardized? Are we going back into a dark age? What's your honest to goodness take right now?
Okay, so I've been involved with occultism for more than 50 years. And in the early days, there was not a lot of information. And so I had to get a lot of my knowledge from practice. You know, the spirits will actually tell you some of the things that you will never find in books, which is the most valuable way of doing it. So the increase in the amount of published material, good published material, has definitely improved the practice of magic these days. I could say that Harry Potter has actually improved the practice of magic, because before Harry Potter, you talk about magic and people, particularly children, are completely skeptical and materialistic about it. And she has opened up the minds of an entire generation,
Mhm.
which is fabulous. And she knew quite a bit herself. So there's, I mean, obviously it's fiction, but there's little elements of practice in there which are quite correct. So I find that fascinating. And this generation of children will be able to accept the idea that, yes, there are books of magic, and yes, you can use it. And no, it's not all crazy nonsense in the head. Sorry, apologies to what's his name, Long.
No problems. But like, because like one of the things we talk about in other segments is like some people think that it's too available now that we have like witch talkers, and there is some people who are taking like I did an episode with Wade where we were talking about the Goetia undressed, and we were comparing and contrasting people who would like print out a sigil and just bleed on it and say I'm going to summon this demon versus your entire approach of the fasting and the abstinence and stuff like that, and we were trying to compare and contrast which is the more effective. Now, the thing I've observed, though, as a fellow practitioner, is there have been material by people who I don't want to mention that have made the practice of Goetia really watered down. But sometimes
Mhm.
I think that watered down nitroglycerin is still somewhat nitroglycerin, and it might go boom. So I wanted to get your take on that, especially with witch talk or TikTok and Instagram and all these things. Like literally, unfortunately, your books can be downloaded by pirates. You know what I mean? So like anybody can
And
grab
frequently are.
exactly.
Even my books in Russian are downloaded by pirates.
Which is the saddest thing. But like, there are some people. I won't mention any names who publish books, and they will take sigils of real spirits and do away with all the prerequisites and just
You know,
you know what I mean? You get what I'm saying? So is this a concern, or do you think that's going to die out eventually?
they won't get results if they're just printing it on their T-shirt or whatever else. Um, and if they just bleed on it, they'll just have a messy sigil. You have got to, the essence of magic is working with these entities. They will not turn up if you're just being trivial and disrespectful and that sort of thing. Now, of course, just concentrating on something in your head, never mind the spirits, etc., can often bring it about, because we do have amazing minds, but it's not magic, it's psychology. Um, and one of the problems with Crowley's work was back in the 1910, he figured that psychology was the coming thing, that psychology would explain all of magic. And nowadays, I talk to psychologists and psychiatrists, and I'm not putting them down. They put a lot of people right, get them to think about their problems and digest their problems and so forth. But they're no closer to explaining magic, because they don't include the very element of magic that makes it work, which is the entities that are called up.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I can fantasize about horse riding, but until I've actually tamed a horse and ridden it, I have no real appreciation of what it is. And so, yes, there are a lot of these books, and good luck to them. They're making money out of it, and people have developed hobbies, and it's a lot safer than real magic. But if you want to do something which has physical external world rapid results, you have got to work with spirits. You can't just sit there, sit in your armchair and think very hard about it.
Which actually will bring me to another thing that I learned courtesy of my dear friend and the proprietor of the Foolish Fish podcast, Denny Poisson, which is the rise of UPG. Unified personal gnosis. Have you heard of this term, Dr. Skinner?
Unverified personal gnosis.
Very
Yes, I have.
unverified. I thought it was unified, but yeah, I mean, but that being said, do you think that UPG is going to overtake? Because I've seen what people have put in with UPG work. It's like, wow, you put a lot of effort into that. I'm just hoping that that system has something to work with. So, in other
Mm.
words, will the systemic approach of the past, which you practice, win the day, or do you think that the chaotic approach of UPG end up becoming the future of magic?
It won't. Is my short answer. No, I mean it's like art
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. An average artist will do an abstract or something which is dashed off very rapidly, etc. He will not produce a painting by Rubens or even Dali
Mm-hmm.
or Da Vinci, or I mean, it doesn't have to be that extreme a difference. But if you're just pottering around, splashing paint on the paper, you're not going to produce a work of genius. And if you're just pottering around in your head, you're not going to produce something that can really be called a magical result.
Fascinating.
And I imagine that will upset a number of people, and I'm sorry about that. But
Dr. Skinner's opinion is always gold here, because this is one thing I wanted to know. These entities, you told me early on, not too many people were working with them, especially at the early parts of the 1900s until later on. Now, the question I wanted to ask you is, do these entities want to be disturbed, or it just, or are they kind of just like, what are these damn humans doing?
I don't think, I think basically most of them don't want to be disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't make it easy, but there are certain things which help you to bind them or bring them. And these are words of power and
Mm-hmm.
various other things which I won't discuss. Um, and once they've arrived, it's part of their nature that they have to they have to agree with or whatever. If you've done the rite correctly, they are sworn to observe and do whatever it is you're asking them.
Yeah,
And
but
that
then
that
with that said, though, the reverse can also happen. Like I remember during an episode of Glitch Bottle, you said about some mage who goofed up an evocation somewhere in France and unleashed a tornado. Is that likely to happen more in the future with people practicing these things?
only if you call the demon in the first place,
Hmm.
because in that case, it was a particular, it was one of the four great ones, was called and not bound properly, got out of control, and tore about 20 square yards of roof off the building that it was uh, the operation was done in. Knocked
Goodness.
down two or three very large trees and generally caused more havoc in that village in France than they had seen in any time in history. And this was reported in the French newspapers and so forth. And I know who was doing it, and I know that they were doing it in that village, and I know that they're responsible and that they didn't bind the spirit correctly. Now, this is this is um, this is a result you don't want,
Hmm.
but you can't get it by just sitting in the corner and going, "Oh, I call upon the demon of Forfal, and would he please do this, that, or the other?" Because he won't come. You have to use the right formula to get him to come, and once you've got him there, then you've got to ask him what you want, and then you've got to bind him, and then you dismiss him. And actually, dismissing demons is not that difficult because they're only too happy to get away from you. So, most of the grimoires, it's expressed as a license to depart. I license you, demon, whatever. You can now depart. You have my permission. Not like the Golden Dawn, where they're doing I banish you, which I think after a spirit has agreed to do something for you, to slap him in the face and kick him out the door is sort of a little bit impolite.
Very, 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 very much true. Very true to that. And because, like, the one thing I wanted to say is, like, of course, there are benefits if properly practiced in any kind of evocation that it could really help you with your life. But, like, aside from this poor French village, are there any other stories that evocations gone wrong that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll tell on myself.
Hmm.
Back in when late 1960s, I was doing an evocation with three other friends. I've told this online before, but I'll tell you again. And who were we? Yeah, it was a mercurial operation. And as you know, Mercury is involved with books and things like that. And with magic, you have to build it up, not a psychological climax, but you build it up to a magical climax. And when you reach that degree of intensity, then you ask for the thing you want it to do. And then you bind it, and then you permit it to leave. And then you're pretty sure it's going to do exactly what you wanted. Sometimes not exactly what you wanted. Anyway, of the four of us, one guy who's passed away now, so I can happily tell the story about him, was a bit of a comedian. And so before we had a chance to actually lay down what we required of the spirit, he chanted the words, Alice Bailey. Now, Alice Bailey is a theosophical writer from, I don't know, the 30s or the 40s.
Hmm.
And she did very large books, which he thought were very boring. I'm not going to
Hmm.
comment on her work. And so he thought that was the funniest thing he could say. Here we are doing a serious operation, and he brings up Alice Bailey, and he chanted it. And the spirit obviously took that, but we didn't know. So I just told him what I thought of him, and we closed off and cancelled the operation and went home. In my case, very annoyed. In his case, a bit perplexed, and the other two guys didn't make a comment. Anyway, the next we were doing it in a building next to a big library. The very next morning, the guy whose building it was rings me up and said, "Do you know what happened this morning? A guy turned up in a station wagon, Holden station wagon, absolutely weighed down with boxes of books. And these books were every single edition of anything that Alice Bailey had ever written in every language. And he dumped them in the front of the library, and he demanded to see the librarian. And he said, I have been bidden to donate these to the library. These are very valuable books. And the librarian took a couple of looks and then said, look, I don't think this is not on any of the courses we're teaching here, so we can't accept it. And he said, you are accepting it, and proceeded to dump it in the entrance of the library until the whole station wagon was emptied, and he just drove off. So this is an example of a fuck up. But the fuck up was caused by this guy, and what he said, the spirit took literally. He's a mercurial spirit, so what was his operation? Oh, I know. I'll bring as many books of Alice Bailey as possible. And this guy was obviously a lifelong devotee of Alice Bailey, and he yielded his entire collection to the library and then buggered off. I don't know whether anybody got his name, um, but that's what sometimes happens. So
That's amazing, actually. So I guess the next time we should like say, if I'm going to do a mercurial operation, I'll just say Stephen Skinner, and I'll be rich for the rest of my life if somebody dumps all your books on my lawn. So anyhow, thank
no. My books won't make you rich. That's
well,
not
well,
going
they're
to
not
work.
exactly cheap, but they're a good investment. So if I have all of them, that's enough for a couple months rent for me. So thank you. I mean, I personally purchased your books, and I think they're amazing. And they're like Pokemon; you got to catch them all. I mean, every time something comes out, like they kind of got a bit ticked off at you because when you released the Ars Notoria, like, oh yes, finally, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a part two. I'm like, God damn it! Just like, why did he have to divide it? Just like, but then, of course, it was still worth it. And the Notoria is something we could talk about in the future because the next thing we're gonna go to now is the Occult X segment. Now, this is what I'm really excited for. This is where you can teach us and the viewers anything you'd like about magic, occultism, hopefully, and we would love to learn anything from you today. Make it as complex or as simple as possible.
Okay, you allow me to have a few minutes off, please.
Yeah, sure.
I will come back in a few minutes.
All right. So anybody on the chat room, Dr. Skinner is presently, I think, probably going to the bathroom or getting something in preparation for that. But at this moment, if you have any questions, send it to the chat room. We're all learning quite a bit from Dr. Skinner's work, and I'm pretty confident we'll probably be able to get him for another episode in the future. But just letting you all know, after this episode, this is going to be the season ender for Magic.tv, meaning we will not be having guests from now until the end of June because we will be formally launching season 3 with a very respectful man to me that I really look up to, that I've learned a lot from, who I have been personally pleading to join the show, but he actually finally agreed, and he will be launching season 3 for us. It's a man I really respect, a man who simplifies the occult practices. So, like, while he's waiting, I'm just going to share with you guys a bit about this techniques in Greco-Egyptian magic. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you about this book is this is a companion book. In other words, oh, Stephen's back. I was going to say, if you don't have the PGM, this isn't going to make too much sense to you. All right, welcome back, Stephen. I was just promoting your work in techniques in Greco-Egyptian magic.
Okay, apologies for the slight break there.
No problem.
So, what do you want me to talk about? Are there any inquiries in the chat room?
Well, there was somebody named Angelo Rossini said, hello, Dr. Skinner, but then I think people are a little bit gun shy right now. They're likely to ask questions on the YouTube channel, but since they're not live, they don't get to ask. So whatever you're willing to teach us, I'd be surprised. It could even be a Feng Shui method. I don't care. But as long as it's coming from you, it's worth its weight in platinum to me.
Okay, well, let's talk about Feng Shui as we've been talking about magic. So first of all, I have people ask me, what should I learn? Should I learn Feng Shui or should I learn magic? And then I ask them, well, what are you trying to achieve? Now, if you're just trying to improve your living circumstances, a bit more money, a better girlfriend or boyfriend, then Feng Shui is somewhat faster and easier than magic. And the reason is that it relies upon your environment, your qi accumulation. And so one of the things that people mess up in Feng Shui is that they mix up the methods. So Feng Shui applies to the interior part of your house, but it also applies to the landscape around your house. And you can make changes to both. But if you're working with the exterior part of the landscape, you know, what you can see in the way of hills and rivers and water, etc., then you need to use exterior Feng Shui or Sanhe Feng Shui. If you're working with your house, the exterior Feng Shui, you will need a lo pan, a Chinese compass, to determine which direction things are coming from or going to. But inside the house, you cannot use your lo pan. And a lot of people do try and divide their rooms up into 24 little sectors and do things with that. You just basically need to divide your house into 9 roughly equal blocks and then work on each of these blocks. And then you need to decide what your objectives are. I've seen some practitioners go around houses and do changes in every single room. Oh, let's put a Buddha here, let's put a fan here, let's put a stone there. This is not the way to do it. You deal with either your main problem or the thing that you want most to achieve. And then you do it fairly sizably. And the thing about Feng Shui inside is that you use the elements to balance what you've got there already. And with that, I say you just can't put a little stone in the corner of your windowsill. You've got to do it in proportion to what your problem is or what your room is. If it's a big room, it needs a bigger cure. If it's a small room, it needs a smaller cure. So,
Let's say love life. If a person sucks in love life, what are some of the cures you'd recommend for that?
okay, so you need to, uh, um, well, there's a number of ways that you can do that. You need to deal with your bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in each of the rooms of the house, there are three stars. Stars is the Chinese name for chi energy. Um, you've got mountain stars or mountain energy, and you've got water stars or water energy. So you need to change the mountain stars for love life. The water stars are for finances, jobs, things like that, because doesn't life easily fall into love and money?
Pretty
If you've got
much.
love and money fixed, then you're okay, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so it's a different star to do that, and so you need to draw the chart of the house, which is fairly simple, and figure out which stars are in which part of the house. Now, the chart of the house is like your own horoscope. So the chart of the house depends upon the year the house was built. And there's a few qualifications to that. If you've had the roof off subsequently, then that date will change. But your date of the birth of the house, not the date you came into the house, is the one you should use. You should then draw up the plan based on that period. And then looking at the stars, the mountain stars in the case that we're talking about here, if the mountain star happens to be a 5, then that is going to be introducing chaos into your life. So you need to neutralize that. If it's a 2, that might bring sickness into your life, and so you need to neutralize that. But if it's a 1, 6, or an 8, then you just amplify it, and that will bring good stuff into your life. And it sounds very new age, but it's not. These things date back thousands of years. Perhaps not much more than 2,200 years, but they still date back a long way. People who say that Feng Shui dates back 6 or 7,000 years, nobody has any proof of that at all. The symbology might date back that far, but the actual methods do not.
What are some of the cures though if you have like a mountain 2 or 5 in your bedroom that's killing your
Okay,
love life?
I'll give you an example. So let me talk about water stars.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one restaurant in a big hotel in Singapore, and very few people came into it, mainly because it was up on the second floor. And it was not financially successful. And they asked a feng shui consultant to come and do something about it. And it had a 2 and a 5 in the room in which the main restaurant was located. And so these are both Earth stars, and so you needed to introduce metal to neutralize or get rid of them. So they said, "Oh, well, we'll put a metal Buddha in the middle of the room or over one side." And I said, "No, if you want to make a big change, then you need a lot of metal." So then they went to the opposite extreme, and instead of just making a larger Buddha or something, they actually went out and bought a diesel engine, a massive diesel engine, put it in the middle of the room and
Uh-huh.
painted it bright yellow. Um, and that actually had a huge impact. And the number of people coming to that restaurant within 2 or 3 weeks increased enormously. And after that, it was very successful financially. But anyway, the point is that when you work out what the cure is, what element you need to cure the problem, then you should do reasonably sizable.
Mm-hmm.
On the love life side, you would be looking at water stars, so you might introduce a water fountain, moving water. And it has to be moving water because you don't want mosquitoes to lay eggs and produce even more mosquitoes, particularly not in Singapore,
Mm-hmm.
where mosquitoes can be rather more dangerous than in the UK because of the diseases they carry. So sorry, I'm going a little bit off target
No,
here.
you're making perfect sense. So the way what I heard you say was, if it's for love life, you'd want to introduce moving water wherever the negative water star is. Am I correct?
Well, where the positive water star is
or the positive one. And
moving.
what if
Yeah.
the negative star is in your bedroom, and that's where you said we need to work with?
Well, the first thing is to check what stars are in which room, and then if you've got a terribly negative star in your bedroom and you have the ability to move to another room, then you move to another room.
Ah, okay.
Uh, and that's the first operation, because there's no point in fighting a negative star if you can in fact move into the room next door and it's a positive star.
Makes
And
sense.
I've found with clients that is often a problem, because they'll say, well, we like this room at the front of the house.
Mhm.
We don't like the room at the back of the house, but the room at the back of the house in that particular case had much better stars. So I had to persuade them, just move and try it out. Um, Sometimes clients are a little bit awkward that way. And actually, I have to tell you that Western clients are the most awkward, because you will give them a list of things to do and they will ring you up a week later. Nothing's happened. And I'll say, have you moved the water? Have you done this? Have you done? Oh, we just did one thing, but not the others. And, whereas if you have a Chinese or a Malaysian client or a Filipino client, they will usually do what is needed. They will go and buy the wind chime, they will buy the whatever it is and install it, usually pretty fast. And then they will see the good results.
So it's like taking their medicine. They can't complain if they only take one of the pills prescribed. If they were prescribed five, of course it will get better.
Absolutely, perfect example.
All
And
right. Oh, go ahead.
Feng Shui is a little bit like medicine, because you don't always get the solution completely right first time. And so I always encourage clients, if it's not working well, come back and ask again, and then you go and look again, and maybe you'll find something else that needs to be adjusted. Like I had one client who they had other concerns, but um, what they wanted to do wasn't going to fix it. And I saw that what they were really having was continual arguments between the grandma and the maid in the house. And I looked at the chart that I had drawn up, and I could see that both the grandma and the maid were sleeping in a 2-3 and a 3-2 room. Now,
Mm.
you know what I'm talking about, and I, I, I don't think I'll explain why that is exactly, but these are instantaneously obvious something that will cause argument. And
Definitely.
so it was just a matter of moving. Well, actually, the grandma didn't want to move, so the maid moved, and then it calmed down, and then the grandma moved, and it stopped. Um, so it's quite concrete, and if you don't see physical results, then you need to go back and check what else was there, if there was anything. So yes,
We've been given a lot. I mean, we've been given bits and pieces of the Western magic and Eastern magic. And of course, if people, before we conclude the show, somebody wants to ask a question. Angelo Rossini is asking, what is Dr. Skinner's favorite top three grimoires he finds the most interesting?
well, I have always liked the Key of Solomon, because I spent a long time digging up the 160 different manuscript copies of this, and these existed before Mathers published it. So Mathers published one version of it. I published three versions of it. So that's my favorite grimoire. The Goetia is also favorite, because these are the operations I did first. Um, but then the Hygromantia, or the magical treatise of Solomon, which I can see from your head movement you're familiar with, has got more detail,
Mm-hmm.
and that provides a lot more usable combinations and things to do. So I suppose the Hygromantia could be my favorite. Um, yeah, there are so many grimoires, but all of them are the result of somebody doing the system, writing out the demons that they communicated with, the methods they used, the incense they used, the timing they used. And some of them are a little bit dangerous, but not for magical reasons, like one well-known set of grimoires suggests that the incense for Saturn should be sulfur. You
Dangerous.
burn sulfur, out off that comes sulfur dioxide, and that is medically very dangerous. And I try to tell people, no, it wasn't sulfur. That is a mistake, a transcription mistake. So one of the reasons why I republish these is I get the opportunity then to create things like that. So it becomes easier to work. And it's only worth doing if the method actually works. So I usually try it out before I edit and experiment a little bit, change one or two things and see what's happening. But
Speaking of,
Matt,
one thing I'm thankful for with you is when I was creating my goetic seals, I came into a bit of a hump about creating the seals for Mars because, of course, everybody knows that the corresponding metal for Mars is iron, but there's a lot of talk that says don't make seals in iron. The spirits hate it. And you were the one who told me, oh, zinc is a good alternative. It was either zinc or aluminum. So I really appreciate that. And I actually think that the value in that, the experiential knowledge of you as a practitioner augments the text dramatically. So thank you as well for that as well, Dr. Skinner.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. But iron is not really liked by spirits. And one of the early magical circles was not just written on the ground, but it was a extended iron chain around the outer perimeter of the circle. And
one of my friends is asking on the chat. He doesn't want to ask in the actual group chat. He's asking me privately. Is Dr. Skinner going to offer any online classes on the Goetia and ceremonial magic like other illustrious authors do? If so, when? Count me in. That makes two of us.
Yeah, I'm afraid the answer is no, because I have a lot of work on hand. I have clients who some of my clients pay me a retainer throughout the year so that if they have a problem, then they can call me and I will then stop what I'm doing and do that, fix that problem for them. Some of the Feng Shui clients in Hong Kong used to be like that as well. They would pay the guy who initially involved me with Feng Shui. But, and so I've got a lot of research on, so actually doing courses takes a lot because you've got to assemble it all, then you've got to speak it and so forth. I do a Feng Shui course every year, and then this year I'm doing one in Kuala Lumpur
nearby
in November. But too much work on hand.
So before we forget, is there anywhere where people can go to visit your stuff? If I'm not mistaken, it's Golden Horde, right?
Yes, Golden Horde is the original publisher. But nowadays, like we're all getting a little old, Golden Horde is also a little bit slower and tireder. So distribution is Llewellyn in the US, which is sort of ironic because they do a lot of the new agey stuff, but they're a good distributor. And otherwise, in England, it's Gazelle. But Amazon stocks virtually all of my books, so the easy answer is Amazon.
And if people want to schedule a session with you for Feng Shui or anything like that, do you take personal clients or are you too busy for that?
I used to, but I don't anymore.
Well, it's a treat to have you here then.
You are one of the last podcasts I'm going to do because I mean I can't do original research and keep all this other stuff in the air, not anymore anyway. So
understood. And, we really thank you for that from the bottom of our hearts. It's such an honor to have you. So with that, Dr. Skinner, thank you so much for everything you taught us today. It was very enlightening, giving us tastes of both the East and the West. And thank you so much for your time. And we do hope to maybe one of these days, if you're up to it, have you again. And we could talk about other things like the Ars Notoria and the Hygromantia and go deeper into the the wonderland of Dr. Skinner's published works. But with that,
Yeah.
I'm going to move you off the stream. Do you have anything you want to say to the guest before we say goodbye?
No, not really, but I'm glad you mentioned the Ars Notoria because they're a beautiful set of manuscripts and they do work. And the reason why I did two was the first one was the sort of academic historic volume, and the second one was the short cut down um, how to practical volume. But you need both if you're going to do practice.
Definitely. So check it out. Ars Notoria. All of his books are on Amazon. Like I said, they're not fluff. They're practical. You could pretty much get straight to it, and they're worth the read. And they're any real practitioner's library will have Dr. Skinner's stuff. So with that, I'm going to move you off the streams, Dr. Skinner, and I'm going to say goodbye to the guests or to the listeners. Thank you very much, Dr. Skinner. Don't go anywhere. I have to say goodbye to you later. But that being said, this is Rob, and unfortunately, Wade couldn't be with us tonight. But with that being said, we're now going on hiatus. We will not be having any more guests until June 30, where we will be soon announcing who our special guest with me will be. So for all of you who've been making Magic.tv the success that it is, I love you all. And we will be releasing some probably Robin Wade's and some educational content reviews, but Magic.tv will be coming back for season 3, Into the Shadows, this June 30th, 2023.